My name is Mohammed Mithin. I'm y'all's first speaker. In 1776, the United States was birthed under our forefathers. And 200 years from then, along with the United States and its Western allies like Canada and Australia and the United Kingdom, these countries have now become one of the largest superpowers in the entire world, leading the decisions that power the entire populations. And it is because of this that we are so proud to propose this solution or this motion, that the solutions are in the West. So first, I would like to go over some very clear definitions. First, what exactly is solutions? Solutions is simply just put, approaches toward global issues or challenges. Then secondly, for the West, West meaning leading Western countries like the United States, UK, and Canada, as well as Germany. Now, we're going to simply go into some of the burdens in order for you guys, or specifically the judges, to vow or weigh this round. First, the prop must prove that the West runs or uses these ideas and innovations and institutes in general. And also, they provide a more efficient program or platform to actually solve these challenges. Then, the op must prove that the solutions from outside of the West are not just available, but are also more consistent and effective compared to the ones that originate in the West. Now, I'll be going over our two contentions. First is education, then secondly, the freedom of democracy. But first, toward education, as according to the UNESCO Heritage Site, one of the United Nations' very own subsidiaries, they tell us in 2024 that over 251 million youth all across the globe lack adequate schooling and education. And the reason why this is so important on a global scale is that this increases the rates of poverty. But this is exactly where our motion, where the solutions are in the West, comes to solve this. As according to Reuters, on May 24th of 2023, they tell us that Western countries or developed countries have a 10 times more likelihood when it comes to have education that leads to increased income by over 200% and reduces the likelihood of poverty by over 2 times. And this is exactly why we, as a proposition, firmly believe that the solutions are in the West. When we're able to combat education lack of when it comes to other countries, and we're able to ensure prosperity all across the globe. But now, moving on to my second contention, this comes down to the freedom of democracy. As stated to us by the Freedom House on May 24th of 2022, they tell us that over 84 countries out of the total 195 are free when it comes to free speech and rights. And over 70% of these 84 different countries are all within the West. But the remaining 111 countries don't have these same basic human rights. And as a result of these countries are overrun by corruption and authoritarian regimes. Yes.
So do you think that all the Palestinian protesters who got arrested had free speech?
That's a good point, yes. But compared to the United States, compared to other countries like North Korea and all these other countries, they don't have that same freedom of speech compared to the United States and other Western countries. So if you weigh the two, the Western countries have more freedom of speech. So moving on, as the Freedom House continues, that over 84% of these countries are over 70% specifically when it comes to the West. And moving on to that Palestinian point that you made, Al Jazeera tells us that one of the specific reasons as to why the tide is changing within Gaza right now is because of Western countries and because of the perception change that is happening. And one key example specifically comes to one of the senators within the Senate, and that's Bernie Sanders, where he recently just stopped, one of the first times in the entirety of the United States nation, that he stopped over $250 billion worth of aid to Israel. If this doesn't warrant a change as to why the solutions are in the West, then I don't know what will. At the end of the day, we see that even though our world isn't perfect, we see that overall the West has more freedom of rights that help our Palestinian brothers and sisters, and also when it comes to education. So at the end of the day, vote for our motion in the proposition. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Hafsan. I'm the first speaker for the opposition. The topic before the House today is the solutions are in the West. The proposition gave a very eloquent speech detailing how there are solutions in the West. They brought forward points about 250 million lack adequate schooling. They talked about freedom of democracy. They brought forward all of these ideas without saying how these are solutions. They brought up so much evidence that just lay there without proving anything. So we here as the opposition are bringing forward the motion that yes, maybe there are some solutions in the West, but there are solutions in other countries as well. The US does not have all the solutions. I'll begin by refuting their points. Their first point was about adequate schooling and education. No, thank you. They talked about how 250 million, a study from UNESCO said that 250 million lack adequate schooling, but they didn't say how the West has a solution to that. They just completely stated that point. They didn't mention, are people going to move to the US to get the schooling? How are those 250 million people going to get that schooling from the US, from the West? They just left that hanging there. Their next point was about the freedom and democracy, and they said that there's freedom of speech in the West. They just kind of brought that out, and when we POI'd about Palestinian protests, they kind of just disregarded that. But the fact of the matter is, the fact of the matter is that this freedom of speech is unreal. Go ahead.
Just because the solutions aren't always being used, that does not mean the solutions don't actually lie within the West. So if we're seeing right now that there's potential.
Thank you. I understand that. Maybe there is potential, but that doesn't show that the solutions are in the US. For something to be a solution, it needs to be able to be put into use well. And they didn't say at all how that can be put into use at all. They didn't say that anything about how about the practicality of it at all. They just kind of threw that out there. Now to move on to what I was actually saying, in terms of Palestinian protests, they were talking a lot about freedom of speech and freedom of democracy. However, the freedom of speech is completely unreal. It is an illusion of freedom, portrayed by CNN and all of these media outlets. And we have clear-cut, very recent examples of people of freedom of speech that's not freedom of speech anymore. Like, for example, Mahmoud Khalil. Everyone knows what happened to him. His story was huge. He's a Columbia graduate. He was protesting for Palestine, and they detained him. That's not freedom of speech anymore. It's in violation of the Constitution. All of these things. So how is that freedom of speech anymore? Yes, maybe the US used to have this idea of freedom of speech, and maybe they're still portraying as if they have this freedom of speech, but they do not. And so now I'll move on to my first point. No, thank you. We as the opposition are going to be talking about how there are solutions in other places as well, and we're going to begin by our first point is about the U.S. and how the U.S. is purely fueled on national interest. And to prove this, we're going to be talking about some historical things such as the Congo, the imperial exploitation of the Congo. So. To begin, the U.S. has exploited the East and has drastically they've drastically exploited the West, the East. And have built themselves up. They're morally bankrupt. They have and always have been liars. They are and always have been liars. They are imperialist and colonialist, and we see this in their exploitation of the Congo. In the Congo, they basically stripped the Congo of their resources completely, and then they kind of retracted once things got too far, and now the Congo is still struggling. So how do you expect the U.S. to turn their scales? They right now for our entire history, they have been liars and imperialists. Even they colonized America. Everything they've done has made them liars and colonialists, imperialists, and they're purely fueled on national interest. And how do you expect that to change? How do you expect them to now have the solutions to any of our problems? Jazakallah khairan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Just 3 years ago, an instrumental tool was released, which was named ChatGPT. This transformed many students' lives and even carried out very high technological functions. And with this technology in place, it has transformed the world, and everything was, not everything, but mainly almost everything was originated in the West. What I do want to start off, I want to break it down into 2 points. I do want to go touch about my rebuttals, and then I'm going to be pointing on my last contention, which is from an Islamic standpoint. For my rebuttals, the speaker, Proposition 1, mentioned that we didn't have any solutions to the West. But that was wrong, because in the US, we have a high standard for schooling, and we have a high standard for education, including those of the Ivy League schools, like Stanford, Harvard. All these Ivy League schools offer these high education to the people in the West. And for my second contention, she mentioned, hold one second, she mentioned that how the US just exploits all these countries. But the whole point of this debate is that it's not a national debate. This is an international debate. This includes other countries, and she failed to mention the other countries that also exploit other countries. And the main point that I want to mention is the burdens and how the proposition fulfilled their burden that we must prove that the Western ideas, innovations, or institutions in general provide more effective solutions to global problems. However, the opposition failed to provide that we must prove that solutions from the outside or from the West and that are just not available or consistently more effective than originating in the West. So the opposition failed to prove their burden while we are proving our burden. Now, I do want to jump in to my contention, which is from an Islamic standpoint. In Islam, it encourages the learning of wisdom from all over the globe. The Prophet ﷺ said, the wisdom in the lost property of the believers, wherever he finds it, is of the most deserving of it. The Prophet ﷺ did not mention one specific location, but he mentioned all of it, that the whole world is a resource to us. That the globe has developed in modern education, healthcare, and government models all over the globe, which I want to emphasize, as solutions to various problems and humanitarian aid. Yes, go ahead.
So again, what do you propose? Do you propose that these international people come to the US?
No, that's not what I'm proposing at all. What I'm proposing is that the West is not just, is one of the solutions that we can expand. What I want to emphasize here is that from the West, that we can expand our solutions to the rest of the countries.
POI.
Go ahead.
So as my first speaker mentioned, throughout these years, the US and the West has not done anything good for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
What makes them start now?
Yeah, of course. That's exactly what I'm going into. So, organizations, Western-led organizations like ICNA, for example, organizations like UN nations, all offer these solutions to all over the globe. Like I want to emphasize that from the West, these UN global organizations that offer all these humanitarian aid can be used for the rest of the globe. Wait one second. And from these, we can have universal healthcare systems, and all these technological advancements from the West can be spread to all over the nations. For example, just 2 weeks ago, Trump went ahead and he talked to the president of the UAE, and they just signed a deal for a major amount of chips to be sold to to Saudi Arabia. And from the solutions of the United States, creating these chips, creating these technological advancements, they're now spreading it all over the globe, and that's what I want to emphasize in my point.
POI?
Go ahead.
You do know that specifically was because that the US had a lot to gain from that dealership. It wasn't like they were doing a generous favor.
But this is the whole point. Like, we are going and we are giving our solutions to the rest of the world. And that's exactly what we want to emphasize here. And by using all these resources and implementing the words of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we can use the resources from the West and we can spread it to the rest of the globe. Thank you.
My name is Fatima Ahmad, and I am the second speaker of the opposition. The topic before the House today is the solutions are in the West. The solutions, plural, are in the West. I'm going to start off by refuting the proposition's refutation to our points and move on to our own points. So they came up and, as their refutation, they mentioned that the international world is our burden, and we have to share the technologies from the east to the west. And they said, what else did they say? They said that, ChatGPT was originated in the West, and that, this has been shared across the world, and this benefit has been shared, to the East as well. And then they mentioned that, these chips were given in a transaction to the UAE from the United States. So as one major refutation we're going to give, or two, is number one, the US will always, as my first speaker said, has their national interests in mind. They will never do anything unless it's the best for themselves. In the entire history of the United States, starting from the foundation of the most revered founding fathers that they said, the slave owners, the ones who came and colonized this land, who killed all the natives, and enslaved thousands of African Americans and stole them from their homelands. And the origins of this country is faulty, and it was built on the backs of the slaves who came here. It wasn't even from the Western people that we got all this virtue and benefits in the West. The U.S. and the West has never a single time helped a different nation out of their selflessness. Rather, they have destroyed most of the East through so many different examples we can give, even in the past 30 years. Go ahead.
The United States has recently been the reason that Ukraine did not fall to Russia. Is that not a instance of them putting other interests first and protecting innocent people?
No, thank you. So that is what the face value point seems. But again, I think a lot of us know that the U.S. does want Ukraine to join NATO, and that's why they wanted, to help Ukraine, is so they can have, some place in the backyard of Russia, basically. And so, as I was saying, so the U.S. and the West have, really destroyed a lot of the Eastern world. You can see literally in the past 20 years, we have Iraq, we have Afghanistan, we have, Egypt, so many different places, and the Congo, as my first speaker mentioned. The U.S. has intervened, has messed it up. They have, gone in with their noble intentions, fixing the world, spreading, and this is even earlier, spreading, civilization, while in reality, all they were doing was exploiting these nations for their resources, in the Congo for their rubber, in, Iraq and Afghanistan for their oil, etc. And just basically, they've only done things for their own national interest. So in conclusion, why would they start helping now? What has changed? Has there been a change of heart that, all of a sudden the US is going to start helping everybody left and right? Absolutely not. Then they came up and said, learning is lost property of Muslim. Sorry, I think I misquoted that. Then they said, ICNA, they mentioned a bunch of, amazing things that came up. And, number one, ICNA was founded by the Muslims who came to the West. So that, to the West, yes. So I'm going to move on to my own point. So they mentioned a bunch of solutions and benefits, but they failed to mention the practicality of it, and every single solution must have a practical solution to it. An example is two math students, one of them amazing at math, the other not so good. That does not mean you have a solution just because one person is good at something rather the other isn't. There has to be some sort of practicality. Now, if they went to the same school, maybe one could tutor the other. However, there is no form of practicality for the US. The US cannot ship Yale or Harvard to the Congo or to places that they destroyed. Because, that's just completely impractical, and, our generous nation would absolutely never do that in their existence. So again, reiterating my points, it's extremely impractical for the U.S. to spread, their solutions, quote unquote, to the rest of the world, because they mention education and democracy. And so far, every time they tried to spread democracy, they have left a bloodbath. Afghanistan, they tried to spread democracy. They left an extreme bloodbath and destroyed Afghanistan's economy from the ground up, and they're still suffering to this day because they tried to spread democracy. And of course, we know that's a complete separate point, that they actually were doing it for their own gain. In Egypt as well, when they went and, they continued to just interfere with the entire East and interfere in elections, they continue to corrupt governments all over the world. And of course, the guise may be to spread democracy, but in reality, it's only to pursue and, spread their own national interests.
Your performance as debaters and arguers, there's a word or not, speaks well for your future in life, because life is ambiguous. Future is not a straight line. You run into roadblocks and detours, and the ability to debate and argue well will come in handy when you run into them to head into the right direction. Now, without debating and arguing with yourself and with others, you will not know what will work and what will not work. So argue well and argue often. And when someone says, "Why do you always argue?" politely and gently sidestep their concern. Debating and arguing well logically and passionately is a right you must cherish. You will not always be right. Sometimes you'll be wrong. But remember, you have a right to be wrong, just as you have a right to fail in order to succeed. Denzel Washington recently reminded a graduating class that Thomas Edison failed 1,000 times before he invented the light bulb. That's how life works. So argue often and argue well. Someone has said that a wise man can hold two opposite ideas in his mind at the same time. It's very important to be able to hold the two opposite ideas in your mind at the same time. So look for that opportunity to argue and debate with yourself and to offer what is truly worthy of your abilities and skills, your passion and your sense of what is wrong and what is right. So happy debating and arguing to all winners and others. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And now to announce the winner of the high school division. The winning team was the Proposition Beam Ventures. Let's get some applause. They came from Texas.